we can like have an official start, Brad, if you want to take over and start
Sure.
the official interview so Rizwan can talk about his new edition of his book, The Simulation Hypothesis. It's
Ah,
a great book. I
Donna has a copy there. Yeah, I've got a copy here. It just came out literally just a couple months ago. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I just finished listening to it about an hour or two ago. I was listening at 2.6, 3.3. It was really good. I loved it. Um, wow, what a powerful book. I just want to introduce you, Briz. Obviously, you're the author of the simulation hypothesis, a legend, MIT, Stanford. I heard in America, it's all about bragging. Yeah, I'm learning to apply to VCs, so they're like, dude, you got to brag more. So, okay, Stanford. MIT, video game pioneer, cryptocurrency and blockchain experience. Jess has experience with Cardano, the Cardano Institute. Yeah, and we've kind of been taking our
Bitcoin
volunteer
only.
organized.
Sorry. No,
Pardon
don't
me?
vote. No, Cardano was old days. I really Bitcoin only, maybe stable coins, but
Ooh, I
like there
triggered.
has to be,
That was bad of me.
yeah, that was a sure. Just so we can we're all family here, right? We're
Yeah,
all Ben and
yeah. Never
Spoons.
sell your Bitcoin, right, Riz?
yeah, never sell your Bitcoin. That's
Y-
basically the only rule. It's really easy. It's amazing how many people ask me for financial and they don't follow it. I bought
Mm-hmm.
my first Bitcoin in 2013, and for 10 years I've been telling people, I just buy some Bitcoin and hold on to it. Don't sell it. And they're like, nah, it's too high. Oh, now it's crashed. It sucks. Right? I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
Well,
buy it now because it crashed.
as a mom who had that theory and a solo mom taking care of two kids on my own, there is mathematical ways to borrow against your Bitcoin. And generally the math works out because historically Bitcoin has appreciated at least twice as much as the interest rate they charge you to borrow against it. And when you do finally, if you need to sell, then there's liquidation things you have to think about. But you can, there's math to be able to borrow against it. And when you need some to get the help you need. And so that's the way to leverage it when you're in a situation where, holding on to your Bitcoin is feels impossible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Diamond hands for sure. Diamond hands for sure. Well, there's one thing I have never actually mentioned about Riz my Niz. I got to know Riz at the Doorway to the Future event last year in Huntsville, Alabama, almost a year ago. And then I met him again at Sci Games, which I heard you guys speaking about. Um, but Riz, there's something I've never said is that he's now officially a doctor. So well done, Dr. Rizwan Virk.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is one of the first appearances. There was a podcast that came out last week, and that was the first time they called me Dr. Rizwan Virk. So technically, I think I don't have my diploma yet, but since I've defended my PhD and everything's done in the US, you can pretty much call somebody doctor as soon as they've done that.
Good, because I've been calling you low-key Dr. Rizmaniz. Dr. Riz, the legend. I don't know if you guys know this, but at the Doorway to the Future, dancing was a big piece of it. Tom was very adamant. We went and had fun with our physical vessels. And Riz lit it up on the dance floor. I was very impressed. You could
Don't
move
know
those
about that,
legs.
but
No, that was
that was
good, Riz.
literally
You're
my
good.
first time dancing in 6 years because of some health issues I had. So
Yeah, and I heard from there you've been getting better and healing, and that's good news. I
yes,
love to hear
definitely.
that, Riz. Well, that's a little introduction. If you'd like to mention anything about yourself, one thing I was really curious to note about is that this book was written in 2024, obviously, of change. It's exponential. I was wondering if, since I just finished that, is there anything you'd like to note that has been an update in terms of your audience for the simulation hypothesis second edition? You could.
Yeah, the first edition I actually wrote in 2019 of this book. And so, on the one hand, it wasn't that long ago. On the other hand, it was a lifetime ago. And the subtitle of the book was An MIT computer scientist shows why AI, quantum physics, and Eastern mystics all agree we are in a video game. Now, the quantum physics and the Eastern mystics haven't changed at all in the last 5 years, but obviously AI has changed because we didn't even have ChatGPT. LLMs were something that was mostly being done in the lab. I think GPT-1 was coming out at the time. And so a lot of what I had put about AI was predictions of how AI will develop. And it actually has developed in that direction. The thing that surprised me was that it's developed faster than I think many of us anticipated, because I mean, the technology was there in the labs, but it wasn't at the point where it could be commercialized or ready for end user use. And clearly now everybody's using ChatGPT, including my students at Arizona State University, where I am today. And it's getting better. It still produces hallucinations. At the back of the book, I have a series of FAQs, or frequently asked questions, which are that people have asked me over the last 5 years on this. But as you mentioned, I wrote this in 2024, the second edition. And I was actually in the process of writing a book about religion and the simulation hypothesis. And those of you who saw my presentation at the Doorway Conference in Huntsville know that I presented on that, because I've gone a lot deeper into different spiritual traditions and found that they all have very similar metaphors when you go to the mystical core of the traditions, right? Most religions, I like to say 70% of religions are about cultural aspects of rules and traditions and these types of things, but about 30% comes from the core, because it always starts with somebody having a mystical experience, whether it's a burning bush, or an angel that's grabbing the person, etc. And so I've gone deeper into that. So I was in the process of starting to write that book, and I've written some academic papers on this now, which actually quote different, mystical scriptures from the Sufi traditions, the yogi traditions, but also from the Bible and the Quran, and say, well, actually, if you were to talk about this today, we would update the metaphors that they're using, because they have to come back and use metaphors in order to explain what they saw, because a mystical experience is in many ways ineffable. And that term ineffable means can't be put into words, yet how communicate what they saw or what they experienced, because it's not just visual, without putting it into words. So they have to use metaphors to do that. And we can get into these a little bit later if we want, what the individual metaphors are. But my broader point is that I found very similar metaphors trying to describe the same thing. And for example, the process of incarnation is also a process of forgetting. And so the Greeks have this metaphor of crossing Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, when we incarnate. And in the Sufi Islamic traditions, they have the 70,000 veils between you and God. And part of the mystical tradition is to try to lift those veils, to kind of go back. But they're really like, the term in Islam for human is insan, and insan kind of translates to a type of prisoner, but it's a prisoner because of nisyan. And in Arabic, nisyan is forgetfulness. So again, the idea of being incarnated and forgetting are implied. In the Chinese traditions, they have Meng Po, the goddess of forgetfulness, who brews the tea of forgetfulness, which you drink before and after. So these are all, I think, metaphors. I was on a podcast recently, and the host was a Jewish woman, and she said, "Oh, we have something like that in the Jewish traditions too." So what's that? She goes, "We have this angel Layla," she said, who basically presses your cleft, where your cleft is. And she says, just before you're born. So the baby learns everything, the fetus or the spirit learns everything. And then just before you're born, the angel presses this spot. That's why you have a cleft, but you forget everything. And now you have to learn it all over again in this life. And so what if, they were all trying to describe something that was real, but they couldn't express it. They had no way to express it except in these stories and these colorful metaphors. And so I've gone deeper in that side as well. Finally, to answer, your question on the AI side, there's a new flavor of simulation theory going around called prompt theory. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. So this is
Do
just within the
expand,
last.
Riz. This is breaking news. Prompt theory here with Riz live.
Yeah. So prompt theory, it happened very recently because a few months ago, Google released their VO3 engine, which could not only produce realistic looking videos, it could also produce actual like, it produces sound. They look like real actors. And even 6 months ago, the AI generated videos, maybe they would look realistic except for little flaws, but they didn't sound realistic. And now these videos look like real actors. And so I've shown clips of this recently, And when I show the clips to people and then I say, oh, hey, that was AI, they're like, really? That was AI generated? And so what prompt theory is when you go in and you give prompts to these characters and the characters in the videos are saying, we're not prompts. Of course, this wasn't prompted. Look at how realistic this is. Look at this vast landscape of, mountains. And, and saying, well, if you go on a date and a guy starts talking theory, that date's not going to work out. And then you have guys saying, we're going to ban prompt theory in our schools. And then you have people who are on situation saying, can we ask our prompter to change the prompt? And because the idea with today's generative AI is, you write a prompt in words and it translates it into, this is not, it translates it into another kind of what they call magic prompt or a more detailed prompt, which then generates the videos out of it. And until now, the idea to generate a whole virtual world simply by, just prompting was not realistic. It was something still far in the future. And so now it opens up the idea that our world was prompted and that each of us is issuing prompts for our own lives in terms of the storylines that we're facing. I almost call it the writer's room, right? And so
Hmm.
this is kind of a new metaphor that I don't think I have in the book yet, but we have our own writer's room, which is each of us, along with others who might with trying to decide what are we gonna throw at these characters next in this crazy, we might know what the episode arc is, but what are we gonna throw at them in this specific episode? You know, what kinds of weird dances are we gonna have them do in Brazil, for example, or whatever the case might
Hmm.
be.
Caroline's
Uh,
on that mission.
yeah, Carol, that's Caroline's writer's room
Oh
trying to
yeah.
figure that one out, I think.
Hmm. They're like, well, she can have a little bit of Riz, Bobby, and Donna, but and then she's got to go do dances in Brazil.
And
She's been
so,
having
so
fun. Pardon me?
yeah, sounds like it. Sounds like she's
So
been having
prompt
fun
theory,
down
did
there.
this come out of that video that I saw of all the AI characters being like, what do you mean we're just AI? What do you mean we're just
Yes,
prompts? That is that where that came from or
terminology
connected?
came from. It's connected
Hmm.
to that
Hmm.
because you have guys saying we're not prompts, and they look so realistic. And again, I've shown that those videos, and we can get those videos online. But the point is that we can now use AI to generate very realistic world. And then Google has just come out with Genie 3, like literally recently, like about within the last 3 weeks, I think,
Yeah, I
which
saw on
can
Twitter.
yeah, which can take a prompt and now it can create not just a video, it can create a navigable world that looks realistic. So you can go left, right, you can spray paint stuff on the walls and then you can come back and it's still there. So it's a new way of generating video game worlds without even having to write the code because the AI generates it on demand. And that's what's incredible because one of the objections to the idea that we live in a virtual reality or simulation has been, it's impossible for computers to generate this world because this world is so detailed. And we're seeing that not to be the case. And then this ties back to science fiction. So, some of my academic work is actually on science fiction narratives and how they affect society. And in Star Trek, The Next Generation, if anyone has ever seen that show, or any of the Star Trek shows since then, they have what's called a holodeck. Right? People know the holodeck. So the holodeck is a room that where you can basically tell it to have any environment and it makes the room look as if you were really there. So you can say to it, we want a street in Paris with, at night on a slightly rainy night with a bar with these lampposts and then there's a
Cozy.
bartender, cozy, there's
Hmm.
a woman in a red dress sitting at the bar. There's a bunch of patrons, etc. But how did they program the computer? They just did it by speaking to it. They didn't have to actually go and write programs. And we are now at that stage where we can do that. And again, this ties back to the spiritual just traditions. And so, for example, if we look at the Bible and we look at Genesis and the creation story, I mean, the creation story sounds crazy to anybody in the modern world, which basically it says God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then he said, let there be the waters. Okay, now let there be land. Now let there be some vegetation. Now let there be some animals. Now let there be humans. And so it's a sequence. And again, that didn't make any sense from a modern scientific point of view, and that he could do it in 6 days, right? But if we take that as a serious thing that might have happened, but it's being described as a metaphor rather than literally, but we now have the capability to see that you could actually speak a world into existence. And I'm not necessarily we need to take the Bible literally or that you need to read the Bible, but it's one of those core things that is across different traditions, the creation myths that happen there. And now we can at least technologically how that could happen.
Yes. In the book, I love that you went there. In the book, you mentioned how most branches of science are now being taken over by information theory or information science, digital science. And so I was just thinking there was an episode of The Simpsons where Lisa has a petri dish and she builds a new society, moderately like prompting your own little simulation. But now, if they were to do that, if The Simpsons were to do that, I'm sure they would be playing on virtual simulation theory, prompting up a world where actually there is one where little Lisa Simpson's daughter plugs in to the web there and goes in. So yeah, it's interesting. The sci-fi feedback loop. I remember discussing that with you because I have a very strong interest in craft, and so when I was discussing with you this show, it was about okay, how do the ships use propulsion? And you were saying some sort of a non-electrogravitic type of propulsion, and I was like, oh, I don't know. That's not anti-gravity. That's not thought control. So it's interesting, the sci-fi feedback loop. So as a creative
Yeah.
and an author, where are you
Well,
going next?
just to, follow up on your Simpsons thing.
Go ahead.
So I think was it Matt Groening, the creator of the Simpsons?
Hmm.
Simpsons. I think he also created Futurama, and Futurama has a pretty good episode like this where they are working to create a simulation, and the simulation is like gets almost as exact as they are, and there's a little, version of Bender the robot, and who was the main character's name in Futurama? I'm forgetting now. Anybody know?
Um,
The main
Someone's got
guy
to
who
know
goes to the
here.
Stephen
future,
Fry.
yeah.
It was Stephen
Fry.
Fry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Say that
right.
again,
Yeah.
Tioma.
That was Stephen Fry and
Right,
Bender the
Fry.
robot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Fry.
Leela, right? So there were
And
versions
Leela.
of them in the simulation doing exactly the same thing. And that
Yeah, and
raised all kinds of
mhm.
questions.
So speaking of inspiration, consciousness, the non-physical information you get, do you think Matt Groening is tapped into something? Do you think he has spiritual practices? How do you think he has such good access to future information in terms of the content he's creating?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you look at The Simpsons. I mean, for one thing, it's been going so long, so he has more chances at bat than anybody else because, I mean, there are no other shows where you can keep the same characters at 10 years old for 20 years with 26 episodes. But that said, there has been a pretty popular set of memes where The Simpsons seems to predict everything that happened, including Donald Trump coming down a escalator while he's running for president, which happened in 2016. So it is pretty incredible. But I do think that we sense the future, and there's the story about the Titanic. The guy who wrote the story before about a day in April in the North Atlantic with a ship called the Titan that was almost exactly the same length that actually sank. And so I think what happens is that if we were to use the virtual reality metaphor for reality. I think that gives us a way to think about many of these unexplained phenomena. And I think, if we use the idea that you're inside a helmet or you're inside an entire suit. Has anyone seen Ready Player One? In Ready
Yeah,
Player
great.
One,
That's a great movie.
yeah, so they're showing something called the metaverse, which they call the Oasis in Ready Player One. Excuse me. And so the metaverse is a term for a 3D virtual world that you enter and you have a character or an avatar inside the world. And in there they have like full body suits, and he's like dancing and let's say she's touching his touching him like this and he can feel it from his suit. You can see the little thing. So it's a way to be fully engaged in the character in an immersive experience. And that's really the first person point of view. But if we were to pull ourselves back and take off the helmet, we could still see what's happening on a screen. We just wouldn't be seeing it from a totally first person perspective. And so if you look at any video games that are like where you got a character walking around, the most common perspective is actually not the first person. There's the first person shooter perspective, where, if you look at Doom or any of these games, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, all you see is just like your hands with a gun. That's the first person perspective. But you can shift the game, and many of them are actually watching like right above the character. So if you look around at videos, I mean, there's the ones that are like God view, which is just like looking over the whole screen and all the characters are there as little dots or whatever. But a lot of the 3D ones are it's like there's something called a virtual camera, and the virtual camera is up here, so it can see your actual body and what's happening to you. But you can shift the virtual camera in a video. And we do this as developers of video games. So you can say, I want to go to any XYZ coordinate within the virtual world. And if you do that, you could actually see what's happening in another city, another continent, another planet, right? Because if it's all inside the virtual game, uh, it's just information from the server, and the people on that other planet are rendering it on their own virtual reality devices or their own virtual reality headset. But they're locked in usually to the XYZ coordinates within, the physical body. That's all you can see. And if you think of blindsight, you can kind of think of it that way as well, where it's basically like getting unstuck from the physical body or remote viewing. So what do you do in remote viewing? They often give coordinates. Like that's how they got going. And by giving longitude and latitude. And then they would say what they would see. So it's almost like if you pull off the virtual reality headset, you can start to pan the camera. But what's interesting is that you can also do any X, Y, Z, T time. So when we record video game sessions, like if you go to YouTube, some of the most popular content on YouTube is actually video game session recordings. And just like just watching the guy's video game session, it's just a common thing. And some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but when my nephew was 3, he said to his dad, who's my brother, he said, "Oh, Dad, I want to watch Star Wars." He said, "Oh, you want to watch the movie Star Wars?" He goes, "No, I want to watch the man and the woman playing the Star Wars game." And it was basically a YouTube video of this man and this woman talking while they were moving their characters, this 3D virtual Star Wars game. And so basically, you can think of that as taking an actual gameplay session and statically replaying it. But you can actually, the reason you can do that is because the engine can go back to any time period as long as the information has been stored. And so I think that becomes a way of being able to sense the future. It's like you're playing the game forward to a certain point in time, so you can actually see what would happen. And there have been reports of life previews and life reviews from those that have had near-death experiences that I think validate this idea. And so that most of you have probably heard of near-death experiences. Many of you have probably heard of life reviews. But the idea of a life review is you go back and you relive every single moment in your life, but you live it from the other person's point of view. And there was a guy named Daniel Brinkley who was struck by lightning back in the 70s. He wrote a book called Saved by the Light, which was a huge bestseller back in the 90s. Interesting guy. And he called it a holographic panoramic life review. And he's become a friend of mine over the years. And he said that when he was in his life review, I mean, he used to be in the military, and he was a bully. He used to beat the kids up. And so he had experienced what it was like to be beat up by. But then, when he was in the military, he actually shot people, and he had to experience what it was like to be shot. And then he had to experience the ripple effects of what happened to that guy's wife, what happened to that guy's children, which of course he wasn't there for, so he didn't know that. So that becomes less explainable. But the idea is if the whole thing is being recorded, including our reactions and our emotions, because people who have had life reviews also talk about the emotions. Like even at the doorway of the future, there was someone there who was telling me about her life review that she had during a near-death experience. She experienced like her mom had spent the whole summer putting in these garden, and as a little girl, she just went and decided to tear it all up, and she had to experience how her mother was so sad to have, that garden tore up, and she never knew that like before, because she was just a little kid playing in the garden. Like she never thought that that would affect her mother so. And so if it can be recorded and then replayed, but then some people in life reviews or in near-death experiences also suggest, like one woman said, well, this is what will happen if you don't go back. You don't have to go back to Earth because we know it sucks. As Swami Yogananda said,
Yeah.
ceaseless joy is not the nature of this world. I think we can kind
No.
of agree on that. We have joy often in this world, but it's
Yeah.
not
I mean,
exactly the nature.
yeah, I was going to say Monday I had very high joy, and then I went on the internet for the week, and it seems like this week there was a lot of stuff trying to get rid of joy.
Yeah, all the time, right? Lot
Hmm.
of stuff and people. But
Hmm.
she also, they played for her what would happen if to her children if she didn't go back. Maybe they would be raised by their father, who was divorced, I think, at the time, or their stepmother, or whatever the case was. But saw that and she said, "Well, I don't want that. I want to go back so that I can raise my children because there were some not so good outcomes for the children." And that's very common with mothers who have life reviews. It's interesting that when they're asked to come back, it's because of the children that they decide to come back. But my question is if it's showing you the future, and many people report before they were born, when they were in the in-between state, what's called the bardo in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, and there are other terms for it. You can call it the before life, the in-between life, but bardo literally means in between. And there was the guy named Dr. Michael Newton, and he ended up hypnotizing folks to take them back for childhood traumas. And by mistake, he took them back before birth, but not to a past life. Heard of people have had past lives. Took them to the in-between state. And he said, and many of them came with very similar stories of what they saw. And one of them was, when they died last time, what happened. And then just before they were born, they said they went through a life planning where they chose a character like we would do in Dungeons and Dragons or in an online role-playing game. You would say, okay, I'm going to be an elf. I'm going to be a warrior. My profession is going to be warrior. I'm going to be a wizard. And this is the general storyline I'm going to pick. They saw these lines like on a screen, what looked like a technological screen. Now, again, I say that's a metaphor. It wasn't an actual TV screen life or the before life. Yeah, but they said they saw like a program that showed these little paths they might take with major points. And I feel like we do that. And then they could zoom in on those points and they could see what was going to happen. So that gets back to, so this is kind of a long question about time. But I think with that, if people can see the future, then the future had to have happened in some and the only good explanation for that from a techno-scientific point of view that I can come up with is that it means that you run the simulation forward in kind of a preview mode, and then you make different choices. If you make different choices, you can run it forward in other ways. So there are life previews. So I think we get glimpses of aspects of the future all the time. And if you had asked me in high school, what are you going to do? I would have said, I'm going to be a computer software entrepreneur, and then I'm going to be a writer. And exactly what happened. But I don't necessarily think it's fixed as in the block universe theory. I think that we also, because we're getting these possible futures, we can change those possible futures, right? I mean, I just talked about the case where the woman comes back and raises her children and she doesn't come back. And she was able to see both of those, what both of those futures might look like. But then when she still had the choice whether to come back or not. So there's this element of branching, I think, that we have to take into account as well.
That works with your prompt theory. So it's running two side like ChatGPT used to run two prompts, and you'd be like, no, I like the left one more. So it is similar to that.
Yeah, it's a good, you can like use the prompt to get the AI to
Hmm.
basically say this is what's likely to happen. And why do
Hmm.
we run simulations in the first place? I
Hmm.
mean,
Right,
one
to
of my
test.
to test stuff, right? I mean, one of the FAQs that I read about in the book that I get asked a lot is why would we be in a video game? Why would we be in a simulation? And I say, well,
Mhm.
there's two questions that I would ask back. One, why do we play video games? And two, why do we run simulations? And the reason we run simulations is to see what is likely to happen, what is the most likely outcome, and then we want to change the variables and say, okay, what if we choose this? What will happen then? You never run a simulation just once, do you? You always run it more than once because otherwise, you don't know what the most likely outcome is, and you don't know what the least favorable or the most favorable outcomes could be either. But that doesn't mean that that's exactly what's going to happen.
That's very interesting, Riz. Is this something you're working on in your mind right now? I'm very interested to get inside your mind. Is this like, are you consistently working on this?
For my own life, or are you talking about just
Well,
the
obviously you've been
ideas of,
thinking deeply on this. Yes.
yeah, yeah, well, yeah, no, I am thinking about this idea of, multiple probable futures and this idea of predetermined. So one of the big debates, right, forever in religion and philosophy and science you know, uh, is everything predetermined? Is it just a deterministic process? And science says, yes, it's a deterministic process. And they say, well, the only free will is randomness. That's the only real quantum randomness. That's how they define free will.
That's a little
But
cold.
it's a little cold, but that's kind of the scientific, point of view. But there's also the point of view that there is actual free will, that you're acting on the actual system from outside the system. And that gets back to the idea of having a soul that is making choices for your character along the way. And this hits at the RPG NPG versions of the
Hmm.
simulation hypothesis, which is something that I talk about a lot. NPC stands for non-player character, which would just be everybody is code, everybody's AI, and the code is just running. So you don't really have a choice. You may have some randomness here and there, but it's just going. And the RPG version is more like the virtual reality metaphor that I gave earlier, where if you think of Neo and Morpheus and Trinity in the Matrix, they existed as players outside of the game. And then they had avatars, characters that were what I call identimorphic. Now, that they look like the player. Now that, of course, was done because they're the same actor, right? It was Keanu Reeves and Keanu Reeves. It was Lawrence Fishburne and Lawrence Fishburne. In a video game, you don't have to look exactly like you do outside. In fact, you don't. You end up looking probably, slightly different, slightly taller, maybe more muscular or sexy, whatever the case is
Hmm.
in your video game characters. Um, but there you have a choice. It might still have some predetermined paths. Like when we build a video game, uh, it might seem to you you have all the choice in the world, but really we've programmed in certain paths that are more likely than others, but you can still make the choice on which of those paths to go to. And even if in an NPC simulation, even if it is just code and deterministic, there's an idea put forth by a guy called Stephen Wolfram, uh, called computational irreducibility. And what he says is for cellular automata, you guys have probably seen the game of life, which is like, it's like these squares and they light up and they're going away. It's kind of a simple way of having a simple set of rules to generate a whole world. And his theory is that the whole world is based on these simple rules. You're just running them again and again. But even if the rules are like completely predetermined in a complex process or a chaotic process, you don't know what's going to happen in step 1 million unless you get to step 999,999. And then you don't know what's going to happen in that step unless you go to 999, 998, 997. And so you still have to run the process. Even in a case where there's no real free will, that's just the code running, doing exactly what it does. Even in a deterministic process, you don't know what's going to happen. And AI LLMs are like that. I mean, the code is pretty deterministic, but you don't always know what it's going to say because there are so many different prompts and things
The
that
output's
it,
probabilistic.
yeah, it's probabilistic, I think is a good way to describe it. But yeah, I mean, I've been working on just this general idea of free will versus not necessarily predetermination, but pre-choosing. Like, are we choosing certain things dynamically? And we're trying out possible futures, and we're basically picking the one that will take us closer to where we want to go. Like, is there a part of us that is actively doing this. So that metaphor, the writer's room, I meant it almost literally. Like, is there literally a part of us that's watching this? Just like I'm
Hmm.
watching this screen, it's watching a screen that shows me sitting in front of this computer,
Yeah.
talking to all of you guys. And you know what? Maybe Brett's is next to me watching his screen, which is showing him sitting in there looking at the Zoom. So it's like multiple levels down, right?
Yeah.
Are we actually making, these choices and adding things in real
Hmm.
time? Which
And
I
at
think
what
is a
level?
question. Yeah, and at what
Yeah,
level
I
are we
think that
making those choices? Yeah, yeah,
that is a good question for personal experience. I had a intense spiritual awakening in 2020 when I was introduced to Tom and throughout that period. And Riz, you came in a little later down the road in my spiritual awakening journey, but you've played a very significant role, especially with your entrepreneurship books, etc. But I woke up and I can remember many times I would wake up from dreams and I would have to write sticky notes all over my wall. And I had all these new pieces of information coming through. And you could ask my mom, I'd be like, I don't, again, I was a young mid 20s. So it's more of a war set. I'm like, I'm going to play a big role in this spiritual war coming up or some sort of war coming up. And I didn't know. And I've been on this path for like 5 years and I feel where I'm going, but I don't know how I'm getting there or what's going to happen. And there's always these situations that kind of hint you're on the path, right? Like meeting you was a good one. The conversations we had at DOPS was, that's divine, right? All playing super important roles. But that's a very interesting one because every day I have the choice. Like Tom says, every day we have a choice to become love. Truly, life is kind of binary. It's a one or a zero in the moment. What is your choice? You could open it up, but are you going to choose that choice or not? So ultimately, choice is a little binary, but it's curious. I'm very curious about this. This is interesting. And Tom has something called the future probabilistic database. So it's like, okay, are we tapping into that? And
yeah.
how much are we influencing with our own intention? Because yeah, I might have seen that, but is my intention now here in this reality influencing the actual physical code we're writing as we render this?
Right. Yeah, and I kind of agree with that. We're putting things into the database with our thoughts, with our actions, but then there may be a part of us that's sitting outside that's helping us evaluate those. And there's this idea of synchronicity. So I wrote a book called Treasure Hunt, which was all about what I call the book of clues, which is your set of synchronicities and clues on your treasure hunt, your personal treasure hunt, whatever that happens to be. And just like in an Indiana Jones film, if you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, now how interesting would that movie be if Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, just got the map and said, "Yeah, there it is. There's our go get it." It wouldn't be a very interesting movie, would it? So
No.
what happens instead is he gets one clue, and then you get the next clue, and then you get the next clue, and sometimes he has to go back, and maybe he misinterpreted you go around. And that's, I think, you're Indiana Jones in this case, Brett, with your different clues about your spiritual
And they
spiritual
show up,
warfare.
right? This was a big one, Riz, since I've met you. This is the angel Gabriel has shown up, a dagger with his angel signals. I found it in the same bay. I'd been looking many times and there was nothing. And then something drew me out. And I found this one with about 8 different furbas. And this is a furba, if you're curious. This is a Tibetan Buddhist ritual dagger designed to pin down negative energy, allow for positive energy. Shamans would use it to traverse and to go through the astral, thin the veil. And then this is a Christian mystic dagger, right? So Angel Gabriel. It was right around a time I had reset everything in terms of what I was speaking. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go speak, sort of like hey, Gabriel shows up to prophets. So it's just a
So
nice little
so
piece
so
of data.
where are these things coming from that show up in your lake in Canada? I'm pretty intrigued here that you're finding
Georgian
all
Bay,
these
Lake
physical
Huron.
objects. But where do you think they come from?
Where do they come from? So this is a good question. If you ask me, it is the virtual game. It is source placing these tools here, whether they got here through a physical path or non-physically appeared for me in this role. I like to lean towards that one because each of the specific times they show up, there's a direct connection to up leveling in terms of emotional, mental, and sort of physical. But I'm not really focused on that right now. I've been jacked. Now I'm working on the non-physical. So it was a family experience last year, and my sister was actually marrying to a part Sri Lankan gentleman. And so it was a beautiful gift I saw from the universe as the guru, the bodhisattva, or whoever it is that invented these furbas, incarnated onto a mountain in Sri Lanka. So I saw that as a gift from the universe. And as well, I was having significant conversations about healing family trauma, lineage, making better choices, seeing mistakes and learning from that, and having really deep conversations with Donna specifically, because I showed up to the bay one day and I just saw that underwater. It was about a foot underwater. And I've had experiences where I've seen non-physical entities, like I've seen what could be considered a demon or an archon. And so I understand that these entities are real. I've been shown that, so I understand that they're real. So I'm very cautious. So then a day later, before I picked those out, you can ask Donna, we had a very deep conversation about this. And I was like, okay, it's time. Let's go get them. And so we found a bunch of these. And I have some friends that saw me on Instagram post about these, and every time they'd go look, they couldn't find one. And then they'd get a thought, oh, maybe I'll go meet Brett there. And so they go down and they find one. So there was always a non-physical telepathic connection. And so yeah, it's fully non-physical, but it's a clue in the physical.
Yeah, I mean, so you're getting physical clues being placed for you, which is really interesting. Because
Hmm.
again, if you think of a video game metaphor, I mean, that's how the video games work, right? They will place clues for you, like in an we're trying to solve the mystery. We'll place them in your path so that you'll come across them. And do you know where the term serendipity comes from?
Please expand.
Yeah, does anyone know? It comes from the land of Serendip. There was a story written by a British guy about the Prince of Serendip, and guess what land that is? Sri
Where?
Lanka. Sri
Oh,
Lanka.
let's go.
Yeah, Sri
That's a
Lanka
sacred
is,
place.
yeah, and I was there a few years ago. In fact, part of my writing of the simulation hypothesis, there's a Sri Lankan origin story because I was there in the early 2018 and I wanted to go see I went there for a business and vacation because a friend of mine is Sri Lankan from college and he has a company there that I helped him start. And I went there for the business meetings, but I wanted to go see the office of Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer. He lived in Sri Lanka for the last half of his life, and his office is still preserved. Technically, it's not open to the public, but you can slip a few rupees to the
Hmm.
guard, and everybody does, by the way. Any Westerner who
Hmm.
goes there who's a
Oh, you
science
would,
fiction
Riz.
fan.
Knowing you, you'd be slipping in and you just walk in like, dude, I'm supposed to be here.
And it was pretty amazing because it had all these mementos from,
Hmm.
the astronaut on the moon, Darth Vader, David Prowse, who played him, pictures of Arthur C. Clarke. But behind his desk, it had all these copies of his books, like 2001, 2010, but they had like multiple languages. And something about that just transfixed me. Right? It's like, have you ever had that happen where you can't take your eyes off something and there's a message for you? And for me, the message was wrapped up in the second part of my story was to be a writer. And it was time for me to get busy doing that. And so I ended up writing an article in Sri Lanka while I was there about all the reasons why I think we're in a video game. Got back to the US, that article went viral. And then there's a whole set of other circumstances, but eventually I wrote the book because of that. So, I can thank the land of Serendip for that as well.
Shout out to the Sri Lanka land. My twin sister just had a niece, so I now have officially family of Sri Lankan lineage.
Oh, great. Nice.
Yeah,
Well, hey,
she's 1/8 Sri Lankan.
if you ever go there, let me know. I want to go back, but I
Okay,
haven't been there in a while.
okay, we'll plan that for sure because I have to go. Oh, and I'm bringing you one of these in person too, Riz. Don't forget.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
So,
Yeah.
Caroline was very adamant that as we're a community, we open up the floor for the community to ask some questions. But I just had one more question for you before we do that. You're a spiritual entrepreneur, you're a creative, you're an author. I was curious, what's next in terms of where you're going? Obviously, you were thinking about this religious book, and with everything related to my life, I'm very curious about that. So, Riz, would you like to share any plans you have for the future?
Well, so one of the things that I'm working on is trying to figure out exactly where I fit in, which is I think something we all are. So for a while, writing was a hobby and Silicon Valley was my day job. And then after I had a health crisis, I got the message very clearly. It's time to start working on the second part. And so writing became my main thing, and Silicon Valley and other business stuff became more of a hobby. And over time, I went back to academia, and I just finished my PhD. And so I like to teach. So I'm thinking of possibly setting up a research center at Arizona State University that would allow me to investigate and write papers from an interdisciplinary perspective, like academic papers about simulation theory, about a computational universe, about religion and philosophy, and about consciousness. And maybe if I'm able to raise enough money for it, set it up in such a way that we can be a cover for, I mean, there are all these academics out there who are interested in these subjects, but it's kind of a rogue subject. There's still stigma. We were talking about this earlier, insight or the, even with the spoon bending, right? They wouldn't believe it even if they saw it. Like it would have to be validated. And, but to have a place where people can go in an academic setting to actually explore these things. So that's something I'm thinking about, but I haven't 100% decided about
Hmm.
doing that yet. But mostly I'll be writing, speaking, teaching, and then we'll see from there. And I find myself less interested in the world of entrepreneurship these days than I was. I mean, I'm still interested in it. I still help people, but it's like I want to go help people find their path in life, which could,
Beautiful.
in fact, be entrepreneurship or could be something else, but less about the money.
Yeah, okay. Well, here's a little compliment. We're all huge fans of Tom here, students of Tom. But Donna, she said if she was to introduce someone to, understanding we're in a virtual game, she's like, I would give them the simulation hypothesis first. Because it is a
Oh,
little like it's like fun, right? It's
yeah.
it's a story where Donna comes from the story side of spirituality with Ram Dass, etc. There's a photo of Donna and I sitting beside our computers beside each other. I got Tom, she's got Ram Dass, and eventually we connected, and I introduced Tom to her, and she's never looked back. But Rizzy, you're a legend too, obviously. I love
Well,
it. I love that
thank
you're.
you. Thank you, Donna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you're trying to help
I,
people because. Sorry, go ahead, Donna.
yeah, no, thank you for saying that because yeah, like big compliments. I love Tom. But my dad's been interested but he like hasn't gotten it. He hasn't read My Big Toe yet. And then after reading this, I was like, you know what, Dad? You need to start with this one because you just give a really good overview. I just feel like it's a really good entry point that references Tom, but you just cover a lot more. And I do like the storytelling. So, and for anyone who hasn't read Riz's earlier books, I actually halfway through the simulation hypothesis went back and listened to Treasure Hunt. So, and then finished the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah.
So
And she left me with a whole bunch of messages when she first read Treasure Hunt. So you
Oh,
unlocked
great.
things into her intuition. She's like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's everything, it's everything. Oh my God.
well, there's a lot there. So
Yeah.
actually, can I ask a question? I don't want to interrupt. If we're opening the floor, I'll ask a question, but
Floor's open.
okay. So yeah, because for anyone who hasn't read Entrepreneurship or Treasure Hunt, um, it's a lot about like honing your intuition and following the clues. So really, for me, it's about kind of more how we can interact with this reality, this virtual reality. So, in terms of simulation hypothesis, what's the practical application? How does understanding the simulation hypothesis help us better play the game here?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And first of all, just on Treasure Hunt, the subtitle of it's one of my books is not as well known, but the subtitle of the book was supposed to be using dreams, synchronicity, and intuition to find true success. But the publishers, thinking they knew better, decided to remove the word synchronicity and dreams and intuition from the subtitle. So not a lot of people know what it's about. And I've had that happen several times where my book on startups was supposed to be called What You Won't Learn at Stanford Business School, and it was published by Columbia. So they took out they took out the term Stanford, which of course made it less likely people would know about it. But in any case, I think that's actually a good thing interacting with the simulation. So I'm glad you guys brought that up because I think intuition and synchronicity is a clue of how the simulation is processing information. And I like to use this example, and those of you who've heard me speak probably heard me use it, but maybe some of you haven't, which is it's the idea of a technological synchronicity. And this is a term that I got from a woman named Diana Pasulka, who was a religious professor but writes about UFOs, and Jacques Vallée, was part of Project Blue Book way back in the 60s and was the inspiration for the French scientist in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But turns out he's a computer scientist as well. That's his background. And it shows that the way that information is being organized in the universe is what leads to the synchronicities most likely. And the other day I was searching for a backpack online. So this is the story that I used to explain this idea on my laptop. And then I went on my phone and I, looked, I was on Facebook or something, and then I saw an ad for that exact, and I almost bought that backpack on the website of that company. I had added it to my cart, and then I had abandoned it. It's what we call in the advertising world of Silicon Valley and et cetera, we call that registering your intent in the database. Okay. And later I saw an ad for that exact same backpack here. Now, there's two possible explanations that you would get in the normal world. The scientists would say that's just a coincidence. Assuming you don't know how computers work, assuming you don't know how the internet works, assuming you know nothing about advertising databases, spyware, cookies, assume you don't know any of that. The scientists would say there's no correlation, intention versus this. The mystics would say it's divine, it's divine. It was, you created that with your thoughts, right? And that created the situation. And it's kind of true, but if you think of it from an information point of view, if there's a database that you're actually putting these intents into, then the universe's engine, the quest engine or the creation engine, just like the advertising engine, will create situations for you based on those intents, information in the database. So I think that's one way, this can help us thinking about the world as a simulation. The other way that's really important, I think, is when we go through really difficult situations, which happens to all of us. I mean, I've written about my own health crisis. I've had to go through heart surgery. And when I did that, it took me, it didn't take whatever the doctor said. Oh, don't worry, you'll be up and running and, a few weeks and you'll be at 100% after a few months. And, for about 9 months, I was basically on the couch, right? And couldn't do anything. And every time I tried to jump back in the business world, I ended up back in the hospital. But I had just enough energy to take an Uber to Starbucks every afternoon and do a couple hours of writing. And I finished 2 books in that 9 months, which was pretty amazing productivity. But if I view that as a quest within this overall storyline, and the quest is a high difficulty quest, like we have low difficulty quests and high difficulty quests. Maybe the people who have it really easy, have no problems, have perfect health, make tons of money, maybe they're like the first time players. As opposed to thinking of them as people who have mastered the game, maybe they're like the ones who are like people say to me, if I was to play a game, I'd make myself a billionaire and I'd make myself all this and say, well, maybe that's the easy level of the game. The hard level of the game is to go through all the shit that we have to go through in life, whether it's financial, relationships, health, etc. So by thinking of life as a series of quests, some of which have more difficulty and less difficulty, it can give us, I think, some comfort during the tough times to say, okay, this is a quest and I can get over this. And let's see where it might lead me next. Maybe it's leading me somewhere different than if I hadn't had this. I would have done a bunch of different things, but maybe that's not part of the story. In my case, I call it a major course correction. It was almost like the writer's room said, okay, this guy is just spending way too much time making money in Silicon Valley. It's time he got busy doing these other more important things, and we're going to force it so that, he's not going to have the energy to do that. So finally he got the message, right? It took a heart surgery for him to get the message that maybe it's time to stop fighting these outer battles and start focusing in on the messages and the writing that you're supposed to do as part of this life. So I think those are a couple of ways I think it can help us. At least that's how it's helped me.
100% Riz. Well done. Deus, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks so much, Riz. I've enjoyed your work and diving into it more and more. 20 years ago, I had an ego death experience where I left my body. I saw a life review and then a future vision, and it completely changed my life as a medical doctor and then documentary filmmaker. And the only way I could explain it is very much what you've been saying. It's like I grew up in the 80s. It's like dropping a token into an arcade and consciousness is playing through this avatar. And each game has its own rule set, whether that's Joust or Ms. Pac-Man. But as we really dive deeper into this, reality as a multiplayer simulation with this rule set. I'm really curious because it feels like we are collectively going through a dark night of the ego with all of the wars and genocide and political stuff. And now that we're seeing finance, and you were mentioning crypto a little while ago, I just wonder if you take a step back from all of your time in Silicon Valley and the making money and game making, when you look at like market crashes and AI disruption and global instability, do you think these could be signs that the simulation is recoding itself? Like we're all being nudged and pushed. That's why there's more of this awakening, more conversations like this, and these new kind of parallel systems that are coming online.
Well, somebody sent me a question the other day and they said, is the simulation speeding up? Because it feels like it is. And it does seem like things are being thrown at us more quickly these days than at other times. So I do feel like we're getting into an interesting point. And it's possible that this simulation has run more than once. It's possible this version, it's like, let's throw in as much stuff as we can at these guys just before, the AI singularity as well, along with all of this political and crazy stuff. That said, uh, there's also questions about the past and whether the past really exists in the way that we think it does, or whether it's a story that gets filled in. And I don't know if Tom talks about this, but I talk about it in my book, The Simulated Multiverse, where it's possible that we are filling in the past. And there's a set of quantum experiments called the delayed choice experiments that kind of show this, that we are not just choosing the present, we're also choosing from what Schrodinger of Schrodinger's wave equation, but more people know him because of Schrodinger's cat, I think, called multiple simultaneous histories. So it's possible that this is, we just happen to be at the point where they're just throwing all of this stuff at us. But I think that's interesting about your experience with the coins putting into the arcade to keep playing this character, and with your specific, was it life review you said, and a near-death experience you had?
Yeah, exactly. Started off as a ego death out of body experience and then saw the life review. And I was given the choice because I understood that we are these little droplets of consciousness. And when we incarnate into this avatar, it's up to us to decide who we will be. Like we are the choice makers. And in
Yeah.
seeing that, I was like, oh, well, then I would choose differently. Kind of like you with your health scare. Mine was a depression, ego death. And that's when I decided to come back. As soon as I said yes, that's when I saw this vision of my future. And I knew that I could choose, and so I did. But I've just been really curious because it seems like all of this awakening has accelerated, certainly since COVID. People that I would have never guessed would be spiritual have been coming to my classes and my meditations, and I'm like, wow, the awakening is happening. And now in 2025, I feel like it's off the charts.
Well, yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I wonder if other people agree there's more awakening going on, or are there some people who are like less awakened who are getting, like, I'm seeing intensity on both sides, let's
It's
say.
just that they're noisier because they have so
Yeah,
much media time.
that could be it. Yeah, that could be it. Because in the scientific community, I'm seeing more opposition than ever to these kinds of spiritual ideas. So it's interesting to me that it's like more intense on both sides rather than just one side. But I think definitely we're, as the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, right? Like the curse.
Wow, that was interesting. I like that. It is a wild time. I'm glad we're all here raising the vibrations with positive intention, though, to all be better people, right? We're doing our work individually. So that's important. Jess,
Awesome. Is my microphone working?
you're on. You're
Yes.
live.
Yay. Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. So I don't need that. All right, so maybe speed read the or speed answer these questions, Riz, because your stuff is amazing. So my mom is 84. She loves to learn. She really liked Tom's stuff, but she really could not grasp the simulation theory. Do you think that there's like an age where an 80 plus people you just shouldn't tell them, like because they might just decide to go, or you know?
Well, I think that's a good point. Like I think people that are older, like I was speaking in Ashland, Oregon. Carolyn and I were talking about this earlier, and it was at a metaphysical library. And um, all the metaphysical people were, really into it. But there were these scientists there, including some scientists who had some experience with remote viewing. So it wasn't like these were like totally closed-minded scientists, but they took that same approach. Look, reality is real, and that's all there is to it. And you can't, convince me otherwise. Well, they didn't quite say that, but that was that was the attitude that they were saying, right? And so I think there is a group, I think, for whom this idea of being in a simulation and computers, uh, they don't really know video games. They don't really understand how people interact in a virtual reality. So all they hear when you say that is, this isn't real. None of this matters. And they react. I mean, the first time I was on Coast to Coast, the guy said, look, I saw my friend get shot. That's real. And I'm like, yes, it's real. And it would be real even if you were in a video game. It would be real too. Right? It would be real to the character in the video game. But Swami Yogananda, who I write about in my book, Wisdom of a Yogi, which is kind of a gateway for people who want to read autobiography of a yogi. It's like a big 500-page book. And he was asking about the suffering of the world, and he was given a different analogy. And the analogy that he got at the time was that the world is like a movie film projected on a screen. It's light and shadows. And yes, the characters on the screen are suffering, but the actors aren't necessarily dying. Like, yes, the characters on the screen are being shot, raped, killed, whatever is happening, right? Because and when do actors win Oscars? They win them for roles that have a lot of suffering on them. But I think for different generations, you're right that there is different language that could be used, perhaps to help convince them of these idea. Or you can use the simulation idea. So there's an axis here where on the one hand, you can talk about the world being built out of information, and you kind of have to get into quantum physics and information science. And they're probably not going to go there. But on the other hand, you can use it as a metaphor. So you can take it very literally. Uh, and I think, I believe we're literally in an information-based reality that gets rendered for us. Or you can take it metaphorically, because whatever computer is running the game, it's not a Pentium processor 386, right? I mean, it would have to be something like a quantum computing system. It's not like our computers, right? And so I think, depending on who you're talking to, you can go more down one axis or the other axis. The other way I explain it to people is to say the simulation hypothesis is actually a series of propositions. The first is that the world consists of information. Do you agree or disagree? And then you can say, well, you know what? Physicists don't disagree with that anymore. They actually tell me that's actually the case. Like even a Nobel Prize winning physicist at the University of Cambridge last year, I was in the UK, he goes, that's not even controversial anymore in physics. Maybe it was once upon a time. The second is the information gets computed over time. It's a little bit controversial, but you can point to Stephen Wolfram's work and other people's work. And then the third is that it gets rendered for us to appear that it's real. And then beyond that, you can go to the fourth proposition, which some people might accept or not, is that it's all a big hoax. And then the fifth proposition is perhaps we chose to participate in the hoax. So depending on the open-mindedness of the people you're talking to, you can talk about it at these different levels, or just as a metaphor and not get into. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And one tiny little follow-up, and I'm going to get back in line so other people make sure they get their question answered. In terms of love, MBT is very much, and Tom's about love is the answer and kind of the reason that this Earth School, I don't think he's used that term specifically. I'm new to MBT this year. So this Earth School is about us as conscious beings, or so whoever the avatar is in the simulation theory, I'm supposed to be more love and it'll show up in my character. Are you on board with that? I know I'm going to read your book. I just got it on Audible. I'm excited. But what's your take on that whole love perspective?
Well, yeah, I am on board with it, although, I don't talk about it so much in the simulation hypothesis book, but I do talk about it from the perspective of if you're playing a game, what's the purpose of the game? Well, the purpose of the game, I don't think we're in a game called Grand Theft Auto where you're here to abuse everyone else, right? And you can tell the purpose of the game by how you evaluate yourself after. And the life review, which incidentally is also in the Quran. They call it the scroll of deeds. And they say there's these two little angels. One's writing down your good deeds and one's writing down your bad deeds. Now, That's a metaphor. That doesn't mean you literally have these angels sitting on your, writing down, oh, he got up today and got on Zoom to talk to the consciousness of. What it means is it's all being recorded. And so just like at the end of a football game, you go back and the player projects it and says, okay, this you did right, this you did wrong. The life review is you judging yourself. And in the Quran, it says, at death, your book will be open. Read your book, and you yourself are sufficient to be the reckoner. So we forget about heaven, hell for a minute, and just say, the purpose of the game is given to us by how we're going to evaluate it. And it's all about how we treat other people. Do we treat other people with compassion and love? Or are we mean to them? Are we cruel to them? Do we do bad things? And I think the reason this world is so bad is because we're given a choice. And individuals are making bad choices versus acting with compassion. And states are making, really bad choices in many cases, but they're also aggregations of the individuals. And so they're failing the test in many ways. But yeah, I do think in the end, that is why we're here is how we treat each other. And that's how we learn. Yeah.
Beautiful, amazing. Thank you.
I love that. That was beautiful. Now, Simon, you're looking very patient over there. Let's hear that voice.
Oh, hi. Great to be here. First time I joined the community, actually. I only joined recently. Met,
Welcome.
met Caroline in Germany in the Parapsychology
Yeah.
Association annual convention in Freiburg. And she looked familiar to me, but only after I come back to UK, I realized I saw her a lot on YouTube interviewing Tom. So then going. I
Classic.
That's
didn't
great. And
realize when we met in person, but I only remembered afterwards. I
by the
realized,
way, Simon, Tom, and I originally met because has anyone watched the telepathy tapes or listened to the podcast? It's about these autistic kids who, are showing telepathic abilities. So the researcher there, Dr. Diane Powell, put on a workshop or symposium for the Parapsychological Association on simulation and autistic savant syndrome. And Simon, myself, and Tom were all speakers at that conference. And that's how we originally met.
yeah, so great to be here. The question I was going to ask is actually covered already by Jess and you's conversation because outside this community, you actually have a lot of resistance or even hostility. I certainly get that. So my question was, what's wrong with those people? I mean, it's so obvious. Tom's book and your book, I mean, explains so clearly and so convincingly. And there's such a beautiful metaphor. And the people just so dumb. I don't understand what's wrong with them. Yeah, they just say, oh, it's
Well, I think
probably.
they're socialized in a certain way. So this is the thing I learned in academia. Like I came back to academia now. Like I didn't go through the PhD process when I was, 22, 23. I went off to Silicon Valley and became an entrepreneur. But what I realize now, because I was investigating UFOs and I interviewed professors who are studying it openly, and I said, well, what was it like? I mean, did people tell you you can't study this? This is a taboo subject. And he goes, well, it's a taboo subject, but nobody told me it was a taboo subject. And I said, well, why is that? How did you know that you weren't supposed to study this? And what they said almost consistently was there was a process of socialization through the academic process. And this happens also in the media and other parts of society that basically in order to be a scientist, you were part of a group. And one of the ways that you know you're part of a group is when you make fun of a different group. And so
Hmm.
in the scientific world, you make fun of those people who believe in out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, near-death experiences, flat Earth, Bigfoot, like they put it all together, right? And so they've been socialized to
Mhm.
associate these. So it's almost like a brainwashing, and it happens not just in academia. I mean, I was on several podcasts recently, what I call the leftist materialist point of view
Okay.
and atheistic point of view. And they were like adamant, like they were into the simulation hypothesis as long as I talk about AI. But as soon as I said there could be a player and a soul, or that it could link to what the mystics have been telling us, they became almost antagonistic, right? They started to
Mm. Yeah.
there's suffering in the world. We can't be in a simulation. There can never be a God. There can't be anything like this. But it was it was in a kind of a materialist intellectual, capacity in society. And I feel like 500 years ago, Galileo was prosecuted by the church because the dominant cultural political force at the time was the religion,
Yeah.
and they wanted to suppress science. But now today's scientists have become the dominant cultural force, and they want to suppress anybody that doesn't agree
Mm.
with the materialist point of view. And it's not a right left thing, but it's interesting to me that I found that many of the religious people who I used to consider not open-minded because they're fundamentalists are more
Mm.
open-minded to this stuff than the people
Yeah.
that I thought were more open-minded, the liberal scientific people who turn out to be the less open-minded people. So it's a very interesting, weird time that we live in. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. On one hand, I'm kind of frustrated. On the other hand, I think we are early adopters, and early
Yeah,
adopters do have advantages, actually. We can benefit earlier. We can
yeah.
be ahead of them. So it's like we bought Bitcoin in 2010 or something.
Right?
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's early.
I wish I had bought it in 2010.
Yeah. So
That's amazing.
it's kind of relieved
Yeah.
thinking that way as well. Otherwise, it can be frustrating because you can't believe so dumb people can so dumb.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to the 70s, so I did a screening of The Matrix. So as part of my book tour, I've been screening The Matrix and giving a little talk. And I did one in Boston. And in Boston, just after my talk, when the movie started, we were selling books outside, and there was this woman. She was buying 3 copies of my hardcover book, and I thought that's odd. So I went up to her to sign the book, and she goes, "Oh, I want to introduce myself. I'm Joyce Fredkin. I'm the wife of Ed Fredkin." And most people don't know who Ed Fredkin is, but he was one of the first guys. He was an entrepreneur, sold his software company in the 70s and became head of an MIT lab on computers. And he was one of the first guys to put forward this idea that the world is a computer program and that everything, and he was attacked mercilessly by the physicists who are like, no, this can't be the case. This can't be a program. But he went to Caltech for a year and basically taught Richard Feynman about computers. And
Mm,
Feynman taught him about physics. And then Feynman ended up writing his paper that led to the quantum computer because of Fredkin. So this guy was one of the pioneers, and but
mm,
he pioneers take arrows. And she told me that when The Matrix came out in 2019, the New York Times asked him to comment on the idea that we might be in an information-based reality, and he was like, "No, I'm tired of these physicists attacking me," and he didn't want to talk about it, even though he believed it. He got
mm.
and so he might have even been an earlier pioneer, but now it's not so controversial that the world is built on information. So at least we've made some progress, like that first part. And then the second part of being a computation is not even as controversial as you might think. So I think we are making progress because there's more of us talking about it. But yeah, sometimes when you make more progress, you get more pushback too.
Yeah.
That's awesome, guys. You do have to take a couple arrows to make some progress. I like to joke, we're building a decentralized consciousness operating system for humanity, and Tom is like the Satoshi Nakamoto. He's the original programmer of this new mental software. So I like to pitch that when we do our community, our volunteer community, because we're trying to build it in a decentralized fashion. So very interesting. It's too bad people are difficult right now. It's almost like there's so much chaos going on that to introduce a door that introduces a little bit of uncertainty is something that people really do not want to participate in right now because I get a lot of hate and I find this stuff people are like oh right yeah okay
Yeah,
like I
you
get
see
a
it
lot
too,
of hate.
right? But that
Hmm.
said, I don't want to make it all seem negative. There are more people than ever that are open to this idea. And I know that from the emails that I get and the conversations that I have online. And so many people are saying, I kind of knew this, but I didn't know how to articulate it. And so I'm so glad you wrote your book. And I'm sure Tom gets, similar. And Simon, I don't know if you get that as well, but people sort of intuitively come to this idea. They just don't know how to express it. And so because of the younger generation, like when I was growing up in the 80s, we'd come home from school and we'd go out and play ball, right? Or we'd go do something, or, the parents would say, go out until the street lights come on. That really happened. I saw some younger people saying, did this really happen? Did parents really used to say, just go out and play till the street lights come on? Like, yeah, it really happened. But now when my nephews come home from school, they get in Fortnite or another video game and they play with their friends as avatars. So that for the next generation, this is not even a weird or controversial idea.
No.
So I think eventually, like they say about physicists, progress happens when physicists get old and die.
Yeah, the
Because,
software automatically does update with every
yeah,
little bit of love
yeah.
we share. So that is good. That is good. I'd just like to get Jack in here because he's been waiting very patiently. Jack, go ahead. You're muted, Jack. There you
Maybe
go.
not so patiently, but yeah, I could ask. I have a whole truckload of questions. So one thing, I have a confession to make. My girlfriend and I live in different cities, and we've read out loud on the phone your two books, The Simulation Hypothesis and The Simulation Multiverse.
You've
Um,
read out loud the books? Wow.
yeah, back and forth on the phone. In fact, we're on our second time through one of the books.
Uh-huh.
But
Wow.
with regards to all this scientific pushback, I came up with a personal experience, and it would take forever to tell you it, but it kind of comes down to the idea that would the simulators let us know we're in a simulation without the ability to hack it somehow? I think they wouldn't let us know we're in a simulation unless we had the ability to hack it. And and I had a set of personal experiences where there's what I call a Gordian knot of coincidences. And it's the coincidences are not like I'm wearing the same color shirt you're having, but they're insane levels of coincidences that happen within a very confined space time. And then I was reading a book recently by Sarah Imari Walker, The World,
Yeah.
Life as We Don't Know It. I think, and she mentioned her colleague, Paul Davies, that came up with the same idea. Have you come across that as a proof? You have to kind of wait till it happens to you, this set of coincidences. You can't go out and provoke the world, as a conventional scientific experiment. You have to kind of wait till the experiences happen to you. But if you come across that as a proof, and for me, it's so overwhelming that I there's a bunch of other pathways to the simulation hypothesis, but it's so overwhelming, the coincidences, that I can't think of another possibility,
Yeah.
that someone's throwing me hints like
Right.
doubting. So
Yeah.
have you come across that as a way, as a proof? But again, it's a passive proof because you can't evoke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that is people say to me, what's the proof, and uh, one, it's hard to prove in a traditional scientific sense if you're in the simulation, just using those criteria. It'd be like Mario inside a video game trying to prove he's a video game. But these glitches, these coincidences, I mean, your Gordian knot of coincidences, for example, I think is an example of the type of glitch that is just so improbable that that would happen on its own, that it's a meaningful coincidence. And Jung called a synchronicity an acausal connection, right? And so it's like these things are connected, but we can't, at least from a materialist point of view, you can't pinpoint the cause. Right. And my backpack story was making that exact point. That was it looks like it was acausal, but it wasn't acausal at all. There was clearly a cause. It was the information substrate of the physical world that made that happen, that made the ad come up at that specific point in time. I do believe that a lot of these types of coincidences and glitches are proof that something more is going on, but they tend to be proof for each of us
Yeah, it's very
individually.
first person. I mean, for me, it was a friend of mine in high school told me to read this book. It's by Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way
Oh,
Comes.
oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
and when you read a book without realizing it, you put a setting in people's faces in the book without even we do it all subconsciously usually. And the town I put it in was Waukegan, Illinois, because that's where my father grew up. And I don't know why. I had only been there a couple times. And it ends up where Greentown in When Something Wicked This Way Comes, if you've read the book, it's based on Waukegan, Illinois, because that's where Ray Bradbury grew up. And Ray Bradbury knew my father and taught him how to play catch. I did this all
Wow.
ahead of time,
Right.
decades ahead of time. I did 2 decades, 3 decades before I found out that that was the truth. It's just crazy. And there's a whole bunch of other coincidences wrapped in there.
Yeah.
That's like, again, I could talk about it for half an hour, but
Yeah.
it's so overwhelming that how could that, it mentions the street my father grew up on.
Wow.
And all this sort of thing. Yeah, it's overwhelming. But I just wonder if that was a proof that, yeah,
Hi, everyone. I'm
that,
I
kind of
think it's evidence, you know.
yeah.
I think it's evidence. That's
But
I
but
mean,
it's only personal because I could never convey that to anyone else, right? It's,
right. But people say to me, anecdote, those are just anecdotes. But the thing is, when you get 1,000 anecdotes, you are
that's why
now
I
at
call
the
it a
point of,
Gordian knot. It's so
yeah,
there's so many of them. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it becomes like if 1,000 people have been to China and telling you there's a place called China, and some guy's never been there says that China doesn't exist because, we agree it doesn't exist. Well, they're all describing something. Yeah. And so I think we can find evidence that we're in a simulation. Even though it's hard to prove that we're not in a simulation, we can find evidence that we actually are in a simulation. And I think these types of things do qualify as a type of evidence.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Are you good, Jack? That was good. I'm glad you got to speak with Riz. I love the fact that you read those books out loud in vehicles and share that. So that's cool. That's cool. Nicole, you've been waiting very patiently. Let's hear it.
Hello. Thank you so much, Rizwan, for this fascinating conversation. I just had one question, and that is, do you support the hypothesis of Penrose-Hameroff that human consciousness is based on quantum mechanics or the entanglement of microtubules?
Well, I think it's an interesting theory because they're trying to find a mechanism for the collapse of the probability wave. Uh, so, so I think that's interesting if that's the case. That said, uh, I personally believe that there's a part of us outside the simulation that is watching the screen, and that's the part that's actually causing the collapse. That said, there needs to be a mechanism in the simulation too to make that happen. And to me, that seems about as good as any, is that you have these microtubules that can, when we're in a state of superposition, it's almost like someone's making a choice and the microtubules are the thing that lets us see that specific choice versus something else. So I'm not opposed to it. I think it's interesting, and it could be the answer. It's still looking at a very materialistic, I think, point of view, which is what is the physical mechanism to do that. So I do kind of agree with it, but I also agree there think there might be more than just that, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Nicole. Thank you. So we've been through Jack, we've been through Nicole. Jess, would you like to get another one in here?
If Riz has time, I understand we're past your time. Are you okay, or do you got to go?
Yeah. I gotta go soon, but let's do one more question then, and then we'll
Okay.
Okay,
we'll
and then
leave it
I'll
at
just
that.
close up with a little note, Jess. So yeah, go
Uh,
ahead.
So, I feel like is there is one of the pathways to kind of maybe evolve us more rapidly or whatever. I don't even know what the right things on the end game is, but maybe get the message out there. Do we have to redefine science? I keep hearing we can't do science. This can't be counted as science because once it's observed, it changes things, and it's hard to replicate if the observation is different. And so then by definition, what we're talking about can never really be called science because science defines science as that. So when do we redefine science, and do we need to redefine science to make the impact that we can make with what we know?
Well, so it's a long discussion, but so there's a field called STS, which is Science, Technology, and Studies, or Science, Technology, and Society, which is technically what my PhD is in. But one of the things they talk about is that science is a social activity, meaning there's no thing called science in nature. You can't just go out there and say, in the trees it says this is what science is. Science is a social activity, so it's a social construction by people, and the people are called scientists. And you can look back at the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, even in the 1900s, and you can see how some of the pillars of how to do this thing called science were. And then, you had Kuhn talking about scientific revolutions and how they change paradigms. I mean, I think it's more that we need a new paradigm, and science can change over time because it's just about people, but it's hard with people that are steeped in the existing way. So it's just going to take time. I think with new generations of scientists coming up, I think there are opportunities to change it over time. So I think it does need to change. But I don't know, we need to throw it out completely. So anyway, that's a short answer. There's a much longer discussion on that, but we're
No,
kind of
it's
running.
beautiful. It's kind of like what Jamie posted in there about the guy that says when the old scientists die off, then the new
Yes.
ones. So it's the younger ones, and the better job which I love Caroline when I speak to her about consciousness of, she talks a lot about the youth and how we're super excited about helping the kids, and the young people, and the young people influence the older generations. So yeah, okay, wonderful, Riz, amazing, thank you.
Great question, Jess. 100%. Riz, I'd just like to finish off with one little question here. As you know, our community, we are students of Tom Campbell, and we're all about the practical application of applying higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of physics, higher levels of awareness. So I was curious. You are the author of the simulation hypothesis, and you speak of quests, XP, and going leveling up through experience. I was curious, is there a quest you could suggest to our audience that they could take today to start to test and experience the simulation hypothesis and the virtual reality we live in here?
Question. I would say, notice the next few synchronicities and then ask yourself, what do they relate to in your past? Uh, is there some thought you had in the past or something that made an impression on you that is leading to this? And I think if you pay attention to those synchronicities and coincidences, and a synchronicity is defined as, there's an internal and an out external event, or a string of synchronicities is when you have something that keeps repeating. It's a clue that repeats. So I would say if you pay attention to those, pay attention to the next few over the next few days, and then look for larger patterns. You might find there's an information substrate going on that you're starting to tap into.
That was amazing. Well done. Well, everyone, I hope you go out and apply this beautiful information we have received from the lovely avatar Rizwan Virk, Dr. Riz Virk, author of The Simulation Hypothesis. What a treat this has been. I'd like to invite you back here again, Riz. If it ever works out, I will come find you in person as well to deliver a FURBA. So thank you very much for your time.